second podcast, and for those of you that missed the first, we ought to do a little background check here. So, I'm Dr. Frank Urasek. I've been doing this medicine for 40 years, give or take, and currently am Director of Acupuncture over at Cook County Hospital. To my left is Christopher Silva, and I'll let him say who he is.
Hi, I'm Christopher Silva. I'm the Director of Administration at the Chicago College of Oriental Medicine. I've recently obtained my license for acupuncture from the state of Illinois, which I'm very excited about.
And Chris and I hooked up first as he was an intern through Pacific, right?
Yeah.
And spent some time, quite a bit of time, as compared to some of the other interns over at Stroger, which was kind of an eye-opening experience. Yeah.
Yeah.
I had you up in PACU and post anesthesia care unit and in some other areas of the hospital, and then when I got associated with the college here as their president, I thought, what a great guy to help us with the technology and as well as his knowledge of acupuncture from his experience firsthand that I observed both at County and in my practice, which he helped me out immeasurably in Oak Park, which is it's a neighborhood clinic, huh? So it really sees a whole different kind of clientele than most acupuncturists see. So we'd like to talk today a little bit about acupuncture based on the scare-off quality of the second part of that word, which is puncture. That you don't necessarily have to puncture in order to get results. So I want to really paint a much broader tapestry of what we can do and why we would do that, why we would do something other than a needle, and when it's time to do a needle. So the whole focus of today's get-together is about what constitutes proper stimulation. And it's not necessarily always a needle. 40 years ago, I was getting trained by a doctor who trained barefoot doctors. And as a gift from studying with him for a year, I got what's called a beard of wheat needle, which was about 14 inches long, that they used on the shoe points on the back. And he told a story about how, as a little kid, he woke up one morning blind, and his mother took him to an acupuncturist, and that acupuncturist threaded the points on his back with that long needle, and he regained his vision immediately. And to be able to endure that, first of all, to be that courageous, to experience that, and to be able to speak from that experience. The second thing that Dr. Han told me, Yinlun Han, was that his father was an acupuncturist, so he was like third generation. And he was 17 when he started his practice. And his first patient didn't come back. And so he inquired around the village, and he didn't come back because he had hepatitis and he died of hepatitis. But to be 17, to take the information you got from your family passed down from your grandfather to your father to you, get out there and do it on your first patient, where I'm sure you have a little anticipation, a little nervousness, and find out, what happened to that guy that he didn't come back, and then finally to find out it was because he had something as terrible as hepatitis. And in those days, not a lot of therapy that could treat that and find that he had died. And he continued to go on and become a successful practitioner and a trainer of the barefoot doctors in China. So my first experience was being handed that beard of wheat needle and saying, oh my God, I don't think I'm going to practice that, using that needle anytime soon. He also taught us stitching, which you had to do with the barefoot beard of wheat needle, stitching with long needles in multiple points, like shoe points on the back, which was a very common technique for him, and then through and through, where you actually go in one side and out the other. And the first time I tried that, or watched him and then tried it, there was a tenting effect where the needle was going through the area, coming out the other side of a joint, but it was making the skin like a tent. You had to actually hold, little trick with through and through, hold your fingers there so that the needle could actually break through the flesh and come out fully out the other side. And so these were techniques that I used and I taught in my first clinical experience at Midwest. And the other one that kind of put a lot of fear into the patients and the students was needling and then blood cupping. So needling to induce bleeding, either with a 5-star hammer or other means, lancets, and getting blood from those points. The only thing I can say about that before we go 180 degrees in the opposite direction, this is kind of feeding the fear of needle phobia now, is that I was called into ER where we got a grant to about a $2 million grant to do acupuncture in the ER, and it turned out to be very successful there. Was a patient who had a terrible inflammation of the nerve, and what is that? What am I talking about, Chris? What's a problem where the nerve is inflamed on the patient? Can you think of that? Because I can't remember the name for it. Shingles, of course, shingles. Horrible pain, and not a lot you can do other than, if you know acupuncture, you go to a heat clearing point, because the diagnosis, and we're going to talk about this in a little more detail, how to find the point and how to find the right stimulation, because those are central, is that because it is heat in the blood, you go to a point that you can release the heat, and one of those points is the governing vessel 14, which is the intersection of all of the yang meridians. So it's a very yang meeting point, and you bleed that and you get instant relief from shingles, much to the amazement of the staff at the ED, emergency department of Stroger, and to the amazement of the patient. So that's a way worst case scenario in terms of needle stimulation, to illustrate that what constitutes proper stimulation is what gets the job done with the least amount of discomfort, but primarily gets the job done. And what that depends on is proper diagnosis, and then, as I like to say about our medicine, it is principle-based, and it is also based on execution. And those two things have to go hand in hand. So if we're just needling blindly, we're not driving the purpose of that needle consistent with a particular principle that matches the situation we're being faced with. So a good example is that shingles. If it's blood heat, then we need to release heat, and you do that through bleeding. And it's a pinprick, it's a lancet. It can be that simple, or it can be even more of that philosophy by using multiple bleeding with the plum blossom and then a cupping. The most vivid illustration that I saw in Guangzhou, China, where I interned, where this young girl was carried in by her father and her brother into the acupuncture clinic on a little chair made from their clenched fists, and she was holding on to their shoulders because she couldn't walk. She was in such pain. And they brought her into the clinic, and she was laid down on the table, and they did plum blossoming on bladder 23, which is a common needling point. And they did cupping. It's called wet cupping, blood cupping, and cleaned her up. It was just in a matter of minutes. She hopped off the table and walked out under her own power. So the criteria, I think, has to be for proper or appropriate stimulation results. Are you not doing enough, or are you doing too much? And that's where we're going to sit tonight, is looking at what the options are out there in terms of being able to do the proper stimulation. And I think you're going to be surprised at the options, because it's very rarely a beer to wheat needle, and very rarely a plum blossom hammer. And it can be all size of needles or no needles. So having said that, Chris, what do you think the first kind of stimulation was on a point in our history of acupuncture?
Acupressure, touch.
Probably, because the points are the points. And the points are discovered in terms of a reaction that you get from that point. So you can do remarkable work with the right point, and that's where diagnosis comes in, with the right point that matches the condition that you're trying to to treat. And I think I said heat because I think many times with bowel issues, that if that is a large intestine excess, A in the Suji vernacular, or heat in the bowels, and that can be based on what kind of stool they have, that LI11 at the outside edge of the crease of the elbow, cubital crease, with the pinching technique where you bend your thumb and use the nail and pinch into that point at the outside edge of that crease, you're literally stimulating a point that reduces heat in the bowel. And you can instruct the patient to do that as well, because we want to get out of this one-shot mentality that okay, what I'm going to do to you today is give you a treatment that's going to rock your socks, and you're going to walk out the door and everything's going to be fine. If you can transition from actually having a proper diagnosis, going to a master point that works with that, explain the principle, and then the technique behind that principle, the stimulation. And that stimulation can be touch, which was had to be the first way those points were located. And what do you think would be the second way? This is before the age of metal.
Fish bones. I heard.
Well,
Was
that's
it
more
for the
pressure. Or, you know,
puncture?
well, they actually used pointed sticks and bones, and they didn't break the skin in the acupressure treatments, and they got a little. But how widely spread? You had to be around fish to use fish bones, you know. So that could have been minimal, but the second way most historians would say that followed pressure was heat, because it was commonly found. It was used in cooking. It was before metal, so needles weren't there yet. And they found that you could warm a point with heat and get a response. So last night, my wife, who had a stroke and was in a lot of pain and doesn't like needles after 40 years of bearing them, there is a point, it's called long bone therapy, which goes from the first knuckle on the index finger all the way to the where that finger joins the back of the hand. That is a long bone, and it is equivalent of the spine. So this is a point, and it could have been one of Dong's very famous acupuncturist who reduced lots of areas of the body to holograms of the body. And the discovery was that this bone that stretches between the first knuckle and where the two fingers come together is the whole spine. And so I took Moxa last night, and I heated, warmed that point, working with, in a sense, the whole spine of my wife Kelly's for just a few minutes. And I was taught you keep the heat on until they say hot, so you know it's getting hot enough. And of course, the more frequently you put it there, the hotter it gets, the faster it gets hot, and the quicker you get a response. Well, she screamed at me in the way that she would do after 40 years of torture. It's hot, you know, and occasionally there's been some swearing. No surprise there when she gets her Irish temper up. And so we did that for a while, maybe for 10 minutes, and the pain was gone in her back, which is significant because she has had chronic back pain, and then a bad fall and a stroke, and that's no small order to get relief quickly by just warming up a part of the index finger on someone that's been through so much. So what we're saying now is in our cataloging of stimulation, appropriate stimulation, which is the whole topic here tonight, and I think you're going to be surprised about some of the options here, is that you want to use enough but not too much, and you want it to work fairly quickly particularly if there's a lot of pain, if there's a lot of suffering. So what we're looking at doing, this will be a first announcement, is we're taking our success in ER with acupuncture. We are putting it into a manual, and we're going to start treating urgent care acupuncture, teaching it, and with the idea of opening up clinics like that around the country that would include those protocols that we use so well with back pain, neck pain, headaches, trauma, shingles, etc. And we'll be teaching that through the school. So this is an early warning, and with the idea of feeding a need, because the outstanding takeaway that was actually noticed around the world, because Thyme, the Swiss publisher, And one of their journals just published the results of our work at Stroger with acupuncture in ER, ED as it's called, emergency department. It's no longer a room. And it has been well noted, and a lot of other ERs are starting to be interested, and acupuncturists are going to have to be trained to fill that need, because there is a need. It was federally funded, and we've got the goodies, and now we want to learn it, do it, teach others to teach others. That's the model. So we learned it well in the last couple of years. Now we want to teach it. We want to teach people how to do it, and we want to create a market that's a needed market, because why would the government throw almost $2 million into experimenting with acupuncture in ER? That's the $1 million question. Why do you think? You get
They
this?
found it worked.
Worked as compared to what?
Opiates.
And what's the problem with opiates?
Opiate overdose.
Opiate overdose and opiate dependence. 100,000 patients or people, human beings, die of opiate overdose a year. Where does that opiate dependence start, by and large? In ER. And so Big Sam, said, look, we've got to find a way to come up with an alternative to opiates to treat pain. And they looked, so 12, 13 years ago, I strolled into Stroger Hospital and offered them free help to provide acupuncture in the pain clinic. And to my amazement, the attitude there was like they were tapping their watch and saying, "What took you so long?" Because they had just gotten a notice from the Joint Commission of Hospitals that unless you provide an alternative to opiates for pain, we are going to shut you and all the other hospitals in the country down. And acupuncture looked like a reasonable backup. And so it was like that we found ourselves inside Stroger doing this work in the pain clinic. And from there it infiltrated up into surgery and other places. But that's not our focus today. Our focus today is what is the promise of it? What can it be used for? And we've proven, and it's been federally funded, that it can be used as an alternative to, or in addition to reduce the amount of drug used and prevent dependence if you're doing that. So where we've come here is that before opiates, people treated pain with pressure, they treated it with heat, and then when metal came along, they started using needles. And that's where, until a young neurologist in 1954 in France found another part of the body to treat the whole body, and what did he use to stimulate that area of the body? What was his name, first of all?
Nogier.
Nogier. Nogier in Lyon, France, had a woman come into his clinic, and he was a neurologist, and she had some pain, and he noticed a burn mark on her ear, and he said, "Qu'est-ce que c'est? What is that?" And she explained that she had gone to a folk healer who had taken a something to cauterize that area, something that was hot, and burned that point of her ear, and her pain went away immediately. And it was just a small point. And so he mapped out the whole ear, which looked like an upside down baby, embryo, and he used for his treatment tool initially high intensive light. He used light, luminescent therapy, which is laser therapy or or light therapy. And then he went on from there to electricity at different strengths and mapped out the treatment. And he also went on to say and work out 3 different levels of the ear. But the point is that he was able to stimulate using something other than a needle on the ear to treat pain. I want to go back a giant step now and talk about what drives where you treat and how you treat. What would that be? What would determine where you treat and how you treat?
Your diagnosis.
Exactly. Proper diagnosis, which is something when you're in the wham bam thank you ma'am mode of practice, you just do what you were taught and hope for the best. And unfortunately, that happens a lot. And so we look at a couple of ways in our medicine to actually get some background about how we figure out what we're going to do. And that's the principal part. It's theory. So you have the 5-element theory, which is one of the older ones, which talks about seasons, and it talks about flavors, and it talks about food, and it talks about sounds, and it talks about the relationship between each of these categories and how they interrelate to each other. So suddenly you have a system approach where it's not just poke what hurts or poke what hurts in a miniature of the body, but it's actually plugging into a system where you're using the 5 elements that rule the 12 meridians and their relationships to each other. So you come up with this idea that fire feeds earth and fire melts metal. And earth feeds metal and earth dams water. And metal, we said feeds water, but it also restricts wood. It cuts wood. So now you have this wonderfully interdependent system that you can use to choose what points you're doing and what net effect you want to do that. So the other more basic principle is the 8 principles, which things are either hot or they're cold, or they're internal, which would be organ, or they're external, which would be muscle and bone and body, external body, and they are yin or they're yang. So they're yin or yang, hot, cold, interior, exterior, and damp or dry, I think is part of that, is it not? No? It's different, but that's still something that we want to look at. So the point is that you want to be able to back into a matrix that can help you sort through what points, in terms of not going with a single point, but plugging into a system, what combination of points are going to do the best thing for you. And if you come from that matrix, some systems of the body work better than the other. Let me explain that. So I went to a World Health Organization conference contains 250,000 acupuncturists worldwide. So it's not a small body. And I went to a seminar that featured two Italian doctors. They had their fancy suits and their sculptured haircut. And these doctors were orthopedic surgeons. And what do you think was the form of acupuncture that they practiced?
Motor point
It was
acupuncture.
It was the sacred turtle. So they took, and how they discovered that, it was in the Tao, is the way I like, because there seems to be no rhyme or reason why they would take the sacred turtle. The sacred turtle is envisioning in the abdomen a turtle with the shell and the four legs and the head, and you treat the whole body based on needling that part of the abdomen that relates to the whole body. And so here are these guys, and the first people, and they got videos of their patients back in Italy. And the first guy is this guy just came out of neck surgery. He's in a lot of pain and he can barely move his neck. Now, the theory that I share with these noble practitioners is that any way you can remobilize or restore function in the body is going to be a fast track to relieve pain. The worst thing you can do is feed the body not moving, because we're animate creatures, and if you lock down a part of the body, you basically feed that mechanism of the brain that says, okay, if I do that again, it's going to hurt, so I'm not going to do that. So you're literally feeding with immobility a counterproductive means of therapy that's A, not going to restore function fast, and B, in that fast restoration of function, not going to minimize pain. Use it or lose it work. So here were these guy fresh out of surgery with the neck, and they take a needle and they go to the neck of the turtle and they do some light superficial pricking of that area, and the guy suddenly gets the use of his neck back right on the spot in this video in Houston, mobbed with acupuncturists and MDs and other people that were watching. And it's a brilliant way of saying that you don't have to go where it hurts on the body. There are microsystems that you can go to and get a faster response. Second patient whose video they show was a guy who just had knee surgery. So they go to it says right knee, they go to the flipper of the turtle. I think it's back up, so they went to the right knee, which was on the left side of the flipper on the lower left of the abdomen, and they needled that. I'd have to check my map to see whether it's a back up or belly up, but the point is they needled that area, that remote area, and had him immediately be able to use his knee immediately after surgery without pain. So what I'm saying, and what I'm going to get to in a minute, is that where it is, it isn't, thanks to the microsystems, and that you don't have to use needles if you have it grounded in principle. And the precision part of the PMP I always go to is, okay, it's about location, location, location. If you have the right diagnosis or the right principle behind your practice, which is you want to mobilize, not just deaden pain like a drug will do, and popping ketamine, which makes you happy, that you actually want to find out how you can least painfully remobilize the patient and reduce pain at the same time. And that's where neuroplasticity comes in. So the key, and I use it a lot in my practice, was shocking results. I have people walking out of the acupuncture room, having walked in with the walker, and they're walking out with it folded under their arm, like our friend Jesus, who had his back broken, coming from surgery, or their crutches are flung on their shoulder, and I'd say, do a little swagger and whirl them around your head when you go out into the waiting room, because I want to show what's possible with what I call neuroplastic acupuncture. Neuroplastic acupuncture is what wires together, fires together. So if there's a way you can rewire the software of the brain to the hardware of the body and get that function restored, you've accomplished two things. You have restored function and you've reduced pain. And the secret to that, Christopher, is to go remote, to find points. See, a lot of acupuncturists just needle where it hurts. Ashi points, ouchie points, you know? Oh, we're going to get that devil. We're going to get it out. So there's no rhyme or reason. And that's, I'm going to use some profanity here. That's what dry needling does. It goes to the site of the area and trigger point therapy. It goes to the area and uses an acupuncture point to restore symmetry, harmony. But it's not plugging into a system. We're plugging into a system. It proceeds based on diagnosis. And if we find an area away from the site, the ear, the scalp, the abdomen, the hand, other microsystems, of which there are many, we actually are able to have that person revisit the use of that area that has been shut off, turned off because of pain and pain memory. That's why I love that amygdala point on the ear, where you address and neutralize pain memory so they can actually have some confidence in using that limb. And probably the most common and amazing, from the point of view of the patient's perception, is the use of the opposite point on the lower leg, stomach 38, for shoulder issues. It's the most common point. It's the point I used in ER, my first call in there. A guy had a dislocated shoulder locked in a howdy position. Hey, howdy, they call it, And so I said, okay, they called me and I sit him down. He's a big guy. He got in a fight and he dislocated his shoulder throwing a punch. I took 2 needles and I did a 2-needle treatment on stomach 38, opposite leg, and stimulated him. I said, okay, you can put it back in. And they just glided it right back into position, just like that. And they practically wet their pants on the spot, because how can you use a point so far away from the shoulder and still have that effect? Because it is a system. It's that simple, and because it's based on principle and precision. So I want to take a break for a moment, and we'll get to the next step, which is how you stimulate.